as we continue walking through the book of 1 Samuel. Now, I want to ask you guys a question, and feel free to answer it. This is not a rhetorical question. This is a question I want answers for. And the way I just worded that makes it seem like a more serious question than it is. But if there was one word, you can only choose one word to describe the current government in our country, what would it be?
Corrupt.
Okay. Corrupt. Okay. Useless. Anything else? Lacking. That's a good one.
Lacking.
Anything else? No?
I think that was true what people want to use.
Yeah, that's true. I think, and this is subjective, of course, but I think the best word to describe the current government in this country is corruption. Because what we have are backdoor deals, stuff going on, very corrupt, and I think the corruption is actually quite unfathomable. Like I don't think we see the fullness of the corruption. I don't think we could even get to the bottom of it unless we're in those high places. Are there any leaders left with any integrity? Does that word mean anything anymore? Has everyone been sold out to greed and corruption? It seems like the only way you can succeed in leadership, political leadership, is if you're corrupt and wicked. I had a couple of years ago, the Christian Heritage Party call me and say, hey, we need a candidate in Windsor. Are you interested? And I said, no. And they said, how come? And I said, because I won't win. I can't win. In this climate, I can't do it. And I get it. They're not going for the win. They're just going there to be a righteous alternative. But I said, number one, I can't do it. I can't be that corrupt. And number two, I got some skeletons in the closet that if I run for politics might come out. And then at that point, it's pointless, right? I mean, I used to be a professional wrestler, okay? And that's a very scummy business. And not that I did anything too bad. Like, I didn't do anything too bad, I guess. But suffice it to say, there's videos and things out there of me that aren't very politically correct and would get me in a lot of hot water if I were to run for politics. There's stuff even after wrestling that would get me in there's stuff you can find on our church YouTube page that will get me in hot water. So anyways, I can't do it. The point is, you have to be corrupt to get the victory, it seems. Well, it was no different in the days of Samuel the prophet, because before he was a prophet, we were introduced to the high priest last week, Eli and his sons. And his sons had filled the tabernacle with corruption and with scandal. But unlike our so-called democracies, they couldn't just cover it up. They couldn't cover up their sin because in Israel, God was king, and he would not tolerate this, this corruption forever. So the question is, what's the answer to corruption? Because it's a problem. We all know it's a problem. Everyone knows it's a problem. What's the answer? Well, it's not another election. It's not another charismatic leader. The answer is a faithful high priest and king who will do all that is in God's heart and mind. That's what we need. And so last week, as I said, we briefly were introduced to Eli the high priest and his sons, which I have a problem pronouncing their names, Hophni and Phinehas, who served as priests in the tabernacle in the city of Shiloh. So during this time, Shiloh was like the heart of Israelite worship. It was a sacred place where God ruled as king over his people. And there was no human king because God governed through his appointed people, whom he called judges, and the priests, his agents, to lead the nation. So, as is often the case, humans in positions of leadership become corrupt. Verse 12 tells us, now the sons of Eli, look at how it says, now the sons of Eli were worthless men. They did not know the Lord. Tell us how you really feel. The sons of Eli, the Bible says, were worthless men. They did not know the Lord. Now, let me ask you, how is it that the sons of the high priest who served as priests in the most holy place in Israel at the time did not know the Lord? Wasn't that their job? Wasn't that like their life? Now look, it's not that they never heard of the Lord. It's that they were rebellious and corrupt. They did not serve the Lord. So what is the point? What good is it if you know the Lord, but you don't obey the Lord? You might as well not know him. They were worthless because they sought their own selfish gain, and they used their position of authority as priests to enrich themselves. They showed contempt for God by desecrating the sacrifices of the people. The Levitical law clearly stated that the fat of the sacrifice must first be burnt to the Lord, then the priest was to take his portion, and then the worshiper was to take their portion. But they ignored this order of operations, if you will, and would take a three-pronged fork and thrust it into the boiling pot of the meat, and whatever came out, they would just keep for themselves. And if that wasn't bad enough, they would even take the best portions of the meat. Look at what it says in verse 15. Moreover, before the fat was burned, the priest's servant would come and say to the man who was sacrificing, "Give meat for the priest to roast, for he will not accept boiled meat from you, but only raw." And if the man said to him, "Let them burn the fat first, and then take as much as you wish," which is how it was supposed to be, he would say, "No, you must give it now, and if not, I will take it by force." Thus the sin of the young men was very great in the sight of the Lord, for the men treated the offering of the Lord with contempt. Give me the best parts. No, that's not how it goes. We don't care. We're going to take it anyways. That sound familiar? You work, make some money, government comes and says, pay up. And you say, no, that's not right. Well, we're just going to take it anyways. So the tabernacle in Shiloh, this was supposed to be a holy place that the people could come to offer sacrifices and pray, as we saw last week with Hannah. How this was the place she went to pray for her son, and God was there, and it was wonderful. But these worthless sons of Eli have turned this holy place into a den of greed and even of theft, not just stealing meat from the people, but desecrating God's sacrifices. This is like pastors and church leaders demanding money from people and skimming off the top. Happens all the time, doesn't it? The more things change, the more they stay the same. And there is still corruption among religious leaders, and we still hear stories of men in positions of leadership who don't know the Lord, but instead use their position of authority to enrich themselves. We know about those, right? That's a thing still. These also, I think, can be described as worthless men who don't know the Lord. Times may change, but the sinfulness of men remains the same. The priests in the tabernacle were supposed to be there to mediate and facilitate the worship of God for the people. They were supposed to be agents of God for atonement and forgiveness and all this stuff, but instead they became agents of greed, a hindrance to God, exceedingly corrupt. We need a better high priest, one who will faithfully bring us to the Lord, intercede for us, and bring real atonement and forgiveness that we desperately need. So let's switch scenes a little bit. From the corrupt, worthless sons of Eli, now our passage focuses on a young man who's also serving in the tabernacle. But this young man is not worthless. He's faithful. He's true. His name is Samuel. This is the child of Hannah, the one whom God gave her after she prayed and vowed to give her son back to God if God would give her a child. So Hannah kept her vow, and the boy was in Shiloh with Eli, and he wore a linen ephod, which was a special garment that symbolized purity and marked him apart as a servant in the holy place. Now his mother used to make him a robe to wear and would deliver it to him every year when she and her husband went up to offer sacrifices. Eli the high priest would bless Samuel's parents and pray they would conceive and have more children, and indeed God did bless her with more children, 3 sons and 2 daughters. But the boy Samuel, he stayed back in Shiloh, And verse 21 tells us he grew up in the presence of the Lord. So here's what the scripture is trying to tell us. You might be like, why would I care about these details? What's the point? The point is, we got two sons. We got Eli's sons. We got Samuel. On one hand, worthless men, corrupt men, sinful men. On the other hand, a young boy, Samuel, who is faithful, set apart, serving the Lord, but not as a priest. The priests were worthless, but Samuel, even as a young boy, was faithful. We don't know exactly how old Samuel was here. Some scholars estimate anywhere from 5 to 10 years old. And we're told that God favored him even more than the priests. God doesn't see age. God doesn't see age. He looks on the heart. So things were getting bad, and word was spreading around Israel about the corruption and wickedness of Eli's sons. So despite being very old, Eli confronts and rebukes his sons. It wasn't just that they were thieves, using their position to enrich themselves. They also would extort women who served in the tabernacle and have their way with them, to put it in very mild terms. Look at verse 22. Oops, flipped too many pages there. Verse 22. Now Eli was very old, and he kept hearing all that his sons were doing to all Israel, and how they lay with the women who were serving at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Again, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Because this is all too common among religious leaders today as well. And lately it seems like a new high-profile leader in the church is being ousted for having some sort of inappropriate relationship with women on staff or whatever in their churches or organizations, or, you name it. I don't know if it's more prevalent today or if we're just hearing about it more because of the internet and the way that information travels so much more quickly nowadays. But I remember even in my time in Bible college, this type of stuff was happening. There was one high-profile, prominent youth leader that was arrested for using his position to extort young girls among his leadership group into inappropriate relationships and things like this. And it's like, how does this keep happening? But as I read 1 Samuel chapter 2, I can't help but think, well, it looks like this has been a problem for a long time. This isn't something that's new. People using trusted positions of religious authority to get women. It's a thing. Instead of leading the women who worked at the tabernacle to the Lord like they were supposed to, they led them to their beds to do unspeakable things. They were greedy for unjust gain, and they were greedy for sinful pleasure. And although Eli was right to rebuke his sons for all these grievous things, he just rebuked them. That's it. That's all he did. Imagine if somebody in a position of religious leadership, it was known that this person was extorting the women in their congregation and imagine this was known, and all that happened was, hey man, come on, stop doing that, bro. All right, we good? Just stop. Okay. And then you continue on as if nothing happened. That's outrageous. That's a scandal. If someone's doing this, it's not just a rebuke. It's a rebuke and like, you're gone. You're fired. You're expelled. You're no longer allowed to do what you're doing. You are banned. Even excommunicated if it comes to that. You cannot allow this sort of sin to just a slap on the wrist. Bad boys. Don't do that no more. He didn't remove them. He didn't set up any form of accountability or safety measures to ensure that the corruption that had started stops. He just verbally lashed them. Don't do it again. Two sons of Eli did, of course, they didn't listen to their father. Why would they? They just continue doing whatever their sinful hearts desired because, as verse 25 puts it, it was the will of the Lord to put them to death. Why does it say that? It seems kind of harsh, doesn't it? Because God knew Eli wouldn't do what had to be done. Listen, if you are extorting women with your position of authority, if you're, I don't want to say the word because I'm going to get banned on YouTube. If you're graping women, let me say it more way where I won't get banned. You know what I'm saying, right? What's the penalty for that? Death. That's the penalty. If you do that, God says you should die. And so God said, Eli, if you won't do it, I'll do it. Because evidently you don't have the integrity to do what's right to protect these people, so I'm going to execute the right judgment myself. So, that got a little bit harsh, didn't it? Let's switch back, because the narrative here in verse 26 switches back to Samuel. It says, now the boy Samuel continued to grow both in stature and in favor with the Lord and also with man. So once again, the Bible here is trying to telegraph something to us. God was rejecting the house of Eli and his sons, and he was accepting Samuel. God, the good and righteous king of Israel, was looking at his kingdom. He was seeing his leaders doing wicked, abominable things, and so he stepped in and said, in essence, you're fired. You're gone. And I'm choosing somebody else. And that somebody else, you will not believe. Who? The little boy. The young man in the temple. Hannah's son. He's the one I'm choosing. God, and this is a pattern throughout 1 Samuel. You'll see God choosing the unlikely one. Right? You get to David. First it's Saul, kind of likely. Big, tall, handsome guy. Then Saul fails and God says, no, I'm choosing David. So enough was enough. God sent a man of God, a prophet, to Eli to deliver the judgment. And as you read the word that the prophet delivers, you can hear the heart of God, that his heart breaks. God does not take pleasure in this. Look at what it says in verse 28 to 29. God says, did I choose him out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, to go up to my altar, to burn incense, to wear an ephod before me? Oh, wait, am I reading right? Yes, sorry. I gave to the house of your father all my offerings by fire from the people of Israel. Why then do you scorn my sacrifices and my offerings that I commanded for my dwelling, and honor your sons above me by fattening yourselves on the choicest parts of every offering of the people of Israel? You can hear God like, why? Why have you done this? This was so unnecessary. Why have you scorned my offerings? After all I did for your fathers, I've chosen you to be my priest, to do this, how I saved them from Egypt and gave them this dignified duty. Why do you scorn me? Why do you hate me by honoring your worthless sons who go about stealing and pillaging and taking advantage of women and extorting your worthless sons? Why do you honor them more than me? Because of this dereliction of duty, God promised to cut off his household. And for those who would not be cut off, he says they would only live to be able to weep and grieve. Very harsh judgment here. The punishment was severe and the word was firm. What Eli permitted to go on in the holy place of God had to be met with severity. This could not, for future generations, they had to know this sort of corruption will be severely dealt with. And a lot of people will point to scriptures like this, say, oh, God is so mean, and look at this God. I thought he was a God of love. Think about the victims of these guys for a minute. Is it loving to allow religious leaders to continue raping women? Is that loving? No, that's not loving. That's supremely hateful. What's loving is removing these worthless sons and letting the future know, if you do this, the hammer of justice will come down hard on you. And in that, I see tremendous love. Because it's the victims who need justice, not the perpetrators. Well, the perpetrators need to face justice, but you know what I'm saying. We can't look at the perpetrators of heinous acts like this and say, oh, well, we need to just be nice to them. And no. This sort of thing is grievous. Verse 35 says, I will raise up for myself a faithful priest who shall do according to all that is in my heart and in my mind. And I will build him a sure house, and he shall go in and out before my anointed forever. So this word was complete and final. God had rejected Eli. He's rejected his sons. He's promised to raise up another priest, one who was faithful, who would do all that was in his heart and in his mind, who would have a sure house, would go in and out before his anointed forever. God, as a faithful, good, wise king, was loving his people by cleansing the holy place of corruption and greed and raising up that young man Samuel to lead the people back, put them back on the right way. Now, while the promise of a faithful priest was partially fulfilled in the priest Zadok under the reign of King David, it was incomplete because this priest did not go in and out before the anointed forever. And it wasn't until many centuries later that we see another sacred place being saturated in corruption and greed. The tabernacle of the Lord was later replaced with the more permanent structure of the temple. And the new center of Israelite worship was found in Jerusalem. And it was the Passover feast at the temple when it was packed with the hustle and bustle, the bleating of the sheep and the clinking of the coins, where we see that the merchants and the money changers had filled the place with corruption again. They overpriced the animals. They ensured maximum profit for themselves without a single care of the worship of God. Passover was a time for worship, for remembrance of how God delivered and saved the people from slavery. Not a time to maximize profits and rip people off. You know, a lot of people, when they read this story, they think, man, like they were selling stuff in the temple, that's so bad. It wasn't the selling that was bad, because the Old Testament actually tells us, if you live far away from the temple, sell your animals, bring the money to Jerusalem, buy back the animals, and offer the sacrifice. Why did God give that concession? Because it's just easier that way. You don't want to travel with all these animals from a far distance. You could get robbed. It's dangerous. The animals could get hurt or die, whatever. So God says, instead of doing that, sell the animals where you are, bring the money to Jerusalem, buy them back, and offer the sacrifice. Makes perfect sense, right? But what happened was they would do that, and then when they got to Jerusalem, they would find, we don't have enough to buy what we just sold. Because in Jerusalem, the money changers would jack up the price. You sold a sheep for 100 shekels or something, just making it up. You get there, it's 200 now. What they were doing essentially was pricing people out of worship. Pricing people. Imagine you come to church and you can walk in these doors and I say, time to pay up. And you say, well, I don't have the money. And I said, well, too bad. Get lost. This is what was happening. They came to offer sacrifice and they were being priced out. And Jesus steps into the scene and he knows what's happening. And his eyes fill with fire and zeal for his Father's house. And he fashions a whip and he begins to clear house. Mark 11 explains it this way. He entered the temple and began to drive out all those who sold and those who bought in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. And he was teaching them and saying to them, listen carefully, he says, is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of robbers. And the chief priests and the scribes heard it and were seeking a way to destroy him, for they feared him because all the crowd was astonished at his teaching. That's the key word. You've made it a house of robbers. They were stealing. They were thieving. There was fraud. There was corruption. And Jesus says, this is a place for prayer. This is a place for worship. This is a place for honoring my Father. And you come in here and you make it a house of thieves. So he enters as a faithful high priest who sees this corruption. And instead of honoring the men as Eli did, he honors God and he cleans house. He doesn't come in there and just say, it'd be really nice if you stopped. Could you please stop? No, he comes in with a whip. Get out of here. Flipping their tables. No regard for the coinage. He didn't care. Oh, that's a nice coin. I'm not going to flip that table. Well, the bronze, yeah, I'll flip that. That's garbage anyway. No, he flipped it all. He chased out the greed. He cleansed the temple. He had no regard for the different. There, finally went. He rebukes them. He doesn't negotiate. He doesn't just rebuke. He cleanses the place. He does it all for the zeal and the love of his Father. But he did more than just cleanse a physical building of corruption, because really it wasn't about the building in the end. He offers himself as the sacrifice. He is the temple of God. That's why he said, destroy this place, and in 3 days I'll raise it up. It took us, how are you going to do this in 3 days? We know you're a carpenter, Mr. Jesus from Nazareth, but 3 days? Come on, there's no one man that's that skilled. Well, no, he wasn't talking about, he was talking about his body. And when he died on the cross and he rose from the dead, it made sense finally. The disciples remembered, oh, that's what he meant when he said he would raise it up again in 3 days. He brought to completion everything that was promised. Number one, he showed himself as the faithful high priest who does all that is in God's heart and mind. Number two, Jesus, his house was built sure. He is the eternal high priest, as Hebrews 7:24 says, that he upholds his priesthood permanently because he continues forever. Number three, he goes in and out before God's anointed. Christ is both, look at this is the craziest part. Christ is both the intercessor before the Father and God's anointed Messiah and King. He's both. And he does this forever. He lives forever. His kingship endures forever. It's truly a tragedy when those who are supposed to represent God to the world end up in scandal and corruption. For many people, when they hear the term church, they think corruption, hypocrisy, greed. And these problems aren't foreign to just the Bible. Scripture doesn't pretend this isn't an issue. Eli overlooked the corruption of his sons, and his sons took advantage of the people for their own greed and pleasure, but God did not tolerate it. The answer to the problem of corruption and sin is not discarding God. The answer is God. And look, I sympathize and I understand with people who have experienced hurts in church contexts, who've been taken advantage of or whatever, grievous sins have been committed to them in the context of a religious community. I'm not downplaying that. God forbid I would ever do such a thing. But the answer is not, or the problem was not God. The problem was the sinful man. And it is a tragedy. But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. People do corrupt things in the name of Christ, but don't think for a single solitary moment that Christ himself approves of such things. This is the same Christ who made a whip and physically drove out the greedy corruption from the temple. The answer is Christ. He promised to raise up a faithful priest to do all his will, to intercede, who himself is a king. This is Christ. He is the answer. And he offers himself as the sacrifice, as our priest. He defeats death. He rises as the sovereign ruler and king. And it's amazing how this one simple truth just can't be grasped by the people. How have human rulers doing things their own way worked out? Has it worked? Are we better off? Every generation learns the same lesson, but not really. If you want less corruption, we must finally bow the knee to the perfect high priest and king, Jesus Christ. Follow him, obey him in all things, in our personal lives, all the way up to the highest leader in the land. Our prime minister and our parliament must all get on their faces and beg Jesus, the high priest, the king, help us govern according to your will. But instead, in politics in this country, leave your religion at home. Leave your God at home. We will govern how we want. Are we tired of it yet? Are we ready to just realize, admit, we can't trust these people? If the posture of our government is not, Lord Jesus, help us, they are in dereliction of their duty, just like Eli and his sons, who deserve to die for their grievous and hateful corruption. You might say, Alan, that's harsh. Don't say that. I'll say it again. They deserve to die for their hateful and grievous corruption. You know how many people have been hurt because of this wicked system? How many babies have been slaughtered in the name of, healthcare or feminism or whatever you name it? You know how many innocent people have died overseas because of wars to fatten the pockets of central bankers and corrupt, corporations and things? You know how much devastation there is because of the corruption in high places? Maybe we don't see it. We're insulated from it, perhaps, but it's there and it's real. Christ, help us. I want to end this sermon with a quote from a guy named Abraham Kuyper, who said, "There is not a square inch in the whole domain of our human existence over which Christ, who is sovereign over all, does not cry, mine." So bring that to fruition, Lord. Your kingdom come and your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Amen.